Hi, my name is Drew Tonneson. I work for Dell Engineering. Today I'm going to show you how the PowerFlex integrates with VMware SRM using the SRA. So what I'll do is go over briefly the PowerFlex setup. We'll look at how it's presented to the vCenter environment, and then we'll use Site Recovery Manager to run some operations against the devices, test failover, and ReProtect. Okay. So here's our PowerFlex environment. This is the protection cluster. So we have two clusters which are peered together for replication, protection cluster and recovery cluster. And if we look here in our peer systems, we'll see that we have up here PF protection here. And then if I come over here and look at the peer, it's going to be set to PF recovery. So these two systems are talking to each other. Once they talk to each other, the way that we set up replication between them is through a replication consistency group. Now this particular group right here that we're going to look at, test RCG, is the group I created in my previous blog post when I went through how replication is set up. You can see down here it's currently active, replicating. This device that it's replicating is 112 gig. So we're going to take that device and we've presented it down to our protection environment. So VM local is presented down to these 4 ESXi hosts in a read-write host access. If I come out to my vCenter here, I can see it's right here, right, 112. I've created a data store on it. And this data store here, you can get a little bit more detail if you have VSI installed, Virtual Storage Integrator. It'll give you information here about type of volume, storage pools. It even gives you some performance information. Now on the flip side, if I look at my recovery site here, the device that is present in the recovery site is set to volume remote. Now this remote volume has to also be presented to an environment because PowerFlex is not going to do it for us when we're using it in SRM. So I come up and look at my volume here again, and you'll notice I have it presented also to 4 ESXi hosts. The other thing you'll notice is my host access here is set to read-only. So there's two modes that you can set it to when it's the read-only device, the write-disabled device. There's read-only and there's no access. So we're going to set it to read-only so VMware can actually, run SCSI inquiry commands on it. And if we look at my recovery vCenter here, we can go out and find the device here available for us, 112 gig, and you can see it's not consumed because it's only read-only, right, presented out here. Okay, so with our volume presented to each environment, what we want to do is we want to go in and look at Site Recovery Manager. So Site Recovery Manager, I have my PowerFlex SRA installed right here. Okay, and I've added an array pair already, and you can see that in the blog post where I went over this. I click on that and it shows me my existing device pairs. You'll see I have one of these pairs is going the opposite direction and then 3 are forward. Bidirectional support is there. So if you want to run half your environment on one PowerFlex cluster and the other half on the other PowerFlex cluster, perfectly fine. I have a single volume here for my consistency group that we're dealing with, the test RCG. Okay, so what we want to do is standard SRM. Let's go in and create a protection group. So we'll call this PFlex PG. We use our data store group array-based replication. We'll click on our PowerFlex array. These are my data stores available. You saw there was more than one consistency group, so that's presented here, but I'm looking for that one data store I created, PF replicated DS, and I do have a single virtual machine and new recovery plan here. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come out to my recovery plan and I'm going to set my virtual machine to not start up. Um, I, I'm sorry, it's already set to not start up. I should say I don't want to set it to start up because timing is just going to take longer if I do that. So I don't want to do that. I'm going to leave that to not start up in the other environment. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to run a regular test failover. Now, the great thing about PowerFlex, if I come back over here and I go into my RCGs, okay, the PowerFlex already has all the capabilities that SRM is looking for. So if I look at my menu here, I have failover, reverse, or ReProtect. I have test failover and test failover stop or test failover cleanup. So my actions are already available to me, which I can manually do, and I did do in the previous blog post. But for here, SRM is basically just going to execute this for me and run it so that we can run a test and have it automate the VMware portion, right? So this is great. In PowerFlex, I can execute these commands, but it leaves out the entire VMware part, which is what SRM gives me. So let's do a test and we'll run that. Now, while this is running, the test here, if we want to come over to the PowerFlex environment, what we can do is we can watch the environment here. Okay, and what we'll see as it runs through is that our source and our target over here will go into a test failover mode. And that test failover, the way it works is that a snapshot is taken of the device, of the target device, and then the volume itself, this target volume here, oh, you can see it just went in test failover. The volume here then is just pointed to that snapshot. So currently our replication is stopped and we're in a failover test scenario. If I come back out to my SRM, we'll see that my recovery steps are complete. If I come out to my vCenter, I will see here's my 112 device, which is now renamed to the snap prefix with, if I click on it, we can see that the virtual machine's been registered. Okay. So at this point, I could go through and run my test, whatever I need to do against the environment. And then when I'm complete, I come back over here and I'm going to do a cleanup. And during that cleanup process, we're basically going to take the device back out of failover and make the pointers go back to the original replicated device information, and then we're going to restart replication here. So replication was paused, but now it's restarted. My pointer is back, and my device has now moved from read-write back to a write-disabled device. And if I come out and look at my volumes here on the remote site, and I look at my SDCs, you'll see it actually has changed the host access now to no access from read-only. The only reason it does that is because on the recovery site, what it does after the test, the initial test that you run, is it goes out and it detaches the device itself. So it actually doesn't reattach the device after the test. It just detaches it, leaves it detached. Therefore, you can the volumes can remain as no access. And each time you run some sort of activity, whether it's a test failover or failover, it will just reattach it. So it's not an issue. Okay, so let's run a true failover now that we know that the test works. The other thing I wanted to mention about the test before we move to failover is the test is designed for just short-term activity. And the reason for that is because you're pausing replication and you're queuing all this information that's going to have to be applied to the environment once the test is done. It impacts the production volume, It provides a delay, while you're testing, you're not available to immediately go to the most current data if there were true failover. So if you're going to do extended testing, it's far better to create a manual snapshot of the target and then mount it separately. So then you don't impact production, you don't impact replication. Okay, but for quick testing, patch testing, queries, things you got to do real quickly, it's a great tool. But if you're going to do user acceptance testing for days or hours, or even anything that's going to load data, something like that, I would definitely use a snapshot and a separate device for that. Okay, so back out here, we'll do our run command. We'll leave it as plan migration. Either one is fine. Remember, from the standpoint of PowerFlex, a plan migration, disaster recovery, it's going to be that same failover command, right? It's issuing a failover either way. The difference here is that SRM does some more checks and will stop the process if there's an issue when you do a plan migration. When you do a disaster recovery, the idea is we need to get the environment up as quickly as possible. VMware will just plow through errors to get the environment available, which you want it to because you need the environment. For example, if the protection site is down, right, a planned migration would fail because it's relying on that to be up. If you run a disaster recovery, on the other hand, and the protection site is down, VMware ignores it and just keeps going, right, because it's a disaster. So while the recovery steps, we'll come back out here and look at our RCG and our test RCG here so that we can watch it in real time. So different process here. We're not doing a test and mounting to a snapshot. What we're doing is we're actually going to turn our source environment into write disabled, right? Read only, no access, and we're going to turn our target into write enabled because we're moving over to the other side now. So recovery plan here, checking out our VMs, and then we'll move over to synchronizing storage. There's our failover in progress. You can see now at the bottom, replication stopped by user. We're in failover state, and now you can see the source volume here went gray, right? So it's not accessible anymore, and the target is accessible. If we were to go out and look at the volume remote and look at our SDCs, look at our host access now, read write. If we went out to our other cluster and looked at our volume, read only, right? So they've switched, and if we look at SRM, we should be failed over now. Yeah, it's just completing the process down here. There we go, recovery plan complete. So we're failed over, okay? In a state of failover over here in our recovery cluster. And now we want to do that final step of doing a ReProtect so that we can basically do a reverse. That's what we're going to run through SRM, which is just going to turn our target system into the source system and just reverse it. So let's run a ReProtect. And come back out and watch PowerFlex since it's more interesting than SRM. Oh, we have an RPO violation because we're obviously switching here. And we started replication again. Okay, and we're just pending consistency, meaning we're just rectifying the data that's changed on the recovery site. We got to get that back over to the protection site. Now, instead of simply reversing the arrow here, what PowerFlex does is it just changes here. So now if you look at here, recovery cluster is local. So it keeps the same direction and just reverses the names instead. And you can see that we're active again. So we're active, we're back to normal. come back out to SRM, and it should show us here that it completed the ReProtect. There you go. So that's PowerFlex and SRM integration. So the one thing I will caution you about is that um, the PowerFlex capabilities that you see here in the menu, right, and then SRM, consider those to be mutually exclusive. So if you're going to use SRM to do these activities, use SRM. If you prefer to do everything manually through PowerFlex, you can do that. What you don't want to do is you don't want to run partials. So you don't want to run failover inside of SRM and then come out into PowerFlex and run your reverse command. That's going to cause all sorts of problems within vCenter because VMware is not going to have done the steps it needs to do. Okay, thank you.